Hi, Holly. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks, Carl. How you doing?
Yeah, doing well, thanks. Thanks a lot for doing this. Really appreciate it. This is definitely not my area of expertise, so really keen to get into the details here, and I'm sure I'll learn a lot as well. Um, just to start with, could you give us an introduction on yourself and your background and what it is that you do?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, Holly Traynor. I have worked in data for around 6 years now. I probably didn't have the most traditional journey in. I did psychology at university, but statistics was always my favourite part of that. So once I kind of figured that out at the end of university, I kind of tried to edge my way into data roles since then. So, yeah, so like I say, around 6 years, I've worked across a load of different industries, so retail, travel, financial services, and the actual roles themselves have been quite varied as well. So I've done a lot of customer insights, data analysis. I've also done some more like traditional data science, some BI. So lots of different types of roles. And then, which brings me to Peak now. So I joined as an insight data scientist and recently moved into a team lead role. So Peak worked with a lot of different industries. So obviously it's good that I've had all that experience. And
Definitely.
I'm sure we'll get into it, but yeah, the role kind of is a combination of all that experience as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, because like, have you found that? Obviously, I've got a lot of questions to ask about this, but like, have you found that perhaps insight and data analysis and things like that, it's like different industries and different companies treat them differently in terms of like how they see that person and what they should be doing? Do you find it's quite different at different companies?
Yeah, I think a lot of the challenge of it, if you're working kind of like in-house for a company,
Mm.
um, what I found anyway is a lot of it tends to just merge into BI. Um,
Yeah,
because a lot of businesses just need to know what's happening.
definitely.
They need to know why
Like
sales have dropped
dashboard
today.
development and things like that rather than actually
Yeah,
analysis. Yeah.
yeah. So it means a lot of time businesses don't have the time or capacity to ask their team
Yeah.
to dive into a bigger question, which is where I think insights comes into it. But yeah, my experience when I worked in house, all of my roles before Peak were always in house, and that was always the challenge, which was everything is very reactive. Um,
Yeah.
and whereas now I get companies who want to be a bit more proactive and have data behind this decision they're going to make, rather than just saying this has happened, why has it happened?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, yeah, it's a really good point that like a lot of organizations will just be like you say, reactive. We need
Yeah,
a dashboard to show us this, but never actually look at the underlying data and try and get that insights.
yeah.
Um,
Or even try and
and
prevent it happening next time. It's just
yeah,
because you've kind of figured out why something's happened, they'll put in a fix and then they'll move on to the next thing. So yeah.
yeah, it's not something you continue reviewing. Yeah, makes
Yeah.
sense. So what is it that so this might seem like a really basic question. I think it's really like good to define it. So what actually is insight and what does an insight data scientist do?
So insight is essentially like we work with a lot of different businesses who have most of the time a big strategic question. They have a ton of data, all siloed, no idea how to even start looking at it. And like I mentioned, they probably have an in-house team, but that team
Mhm.
is probably churning out a lot of like reactive BI. So Insight essentially takes all of that data from all different sources, deep dives into it. And the main thing Insight is it's very output driven. So everything that we do in our team is to give a business recommendation backed with data. So
Mm.
everything we do will be to say, try and find the opportunities in this data that is so big that it takes
Yeah,
however
makes
long
sense.
it takes for us to do. So that is the main kind of thing, and we work with companies on. So we kind of do like project based work. So it's like a 4-week project, a
Yeah.
full deep dive into a particular business area, and then we present back at the end of that 4 weeks with essentially our recommendations on what they should do. Um, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not sure if that answers all of your question,
No, it
but
definitely does. Yeah. Have you got have you got like a potential problem that you could bring to life just to like so you can sort of understand it from a real life perspective? Doesn't have to,
Yeah.
obviously you don't have to name clients or anything like that, but if you've got a sort of an example would be great.
Yeah, there's a couple. So we work with a lot of retail customers, but also CPG manufacturing. So a typical question that a retail customer might have is they might just not know who their customer base is. So they might have an idea, or it might be that when they started, they knew who their customer was, but they might be 10 years into that journey now with a lot of customer data, but not any real idea of like who their customer is or how to optimize their proposition for their current customer base. So
Yeah.
One of the things we've done for a lot of customers is segmenting those customers into personas, to try and identify what kind of customers they have and bring them to life a little bit so they can make more personalized recommendations. So that's like quite a typical like retail example. And then on the other side, we've got a lot of companies who want to optimize their supply chain, but they might not actually be sure which part of their supply chain needs optimizing. So another thing we could do is kind of like look at all of the areas of that, and then we make recommendations on where best to optimize. And then we've done another one that was really cool, which was basically simulating how to best stock various warehouses that was the most cost effective, but also supplied what they needed to supply. So yeah, very varied. So it makes for a very fun. But yeah, those are a few examples I can think of.
Yeah, that's great. And I think what's really interesting is like what you said earlier as well, in terms of like the typically organizations have like in-house teams of like data analysts and things like that, but they're so focused on, like you say, the day-to-day and reacting to things, whereas you can actually go in and almost not be bothered by this kind of day-to-day and business as usual. You can actually just go in and really dig into data. I think that's something that's probably missing from a lot of organizations. So yeah, that's quite interesting. And with the examples you gave as well, I think to a lot of people, they might, when you mention like segmentation and recommendations, that's almost like in the world of data science. So how is that like different? How would insight be different to typical data science problems?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think the main difference is we don't put our models into production. So we use data science techniques like k-means clustering or regressions for elasticities, but for a point in time. So we will use those techniques to allow us to look into the data, into customers' historical data, and show them what is in it. So it might be saying, some companies might have a markdown strategy that they just mark down all products this equally. So one of the things we might do is look at which products are actually elastic and which aren't. So we can say at this point in time, your current product mix looks like this. You actually have 50% of products that are inelastic. So you're marking down products that aren't actually responsive to markdown. Whereas like traditional data science would do that, but they would test, train, automate the model. It would run daily and put it into production. And so that obviously allows them to make these decisions at scale. But what insight does is kind of say, like, this is the current state of play, like this is the opportunity. And that's, I guess, the main difference, is like revealing what there is to go at. So yeah, I don't know if that.
No, that's a really brilliant. I don't think I realized that was, that makes a lot of sense, is that you're using a lot of the same techniques as data scientists, but as you say, you've got like a problem over 4 weeks, and it's kind of like, this is our data set. We don't need to worry about it moving. We're essentially looking at like a static set of data. Here's the segmentation, recommendations, whatever it is. Work with that. And do you sometimes find that if a customer's really happy with something like that, would that potentially then become a more productionized data science model that runs, more frequently?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of our customers, especially with the segmentation one, once you've kind of said this is your customer base, like you've got 4 personas, the next thing the customer then wants to say is, well, what about new customers? And you want to see a lot of retail customers will have like a VIP persona. So you want to be able to see customers moving in and out of different personas. So I think, the next natural step is to put those things into production. So for the personas one, we've done that. We've set that up so that can be a daily run. So new customers will get assigned to their nearest persona.
Yeah.
And then customers can also track, movement in and out. So yeah, it's definitely the next natural step. I think some of the customers we work with are quite like immature with their data journey. So even just that insight of like size of the prize is a lot for them to then build a strategy around. Other customers we work with, they might already know their markdown strategy isn't working. And so it'd be a much easier transition for them to say, we need this run daily, we need this automated. So it really depends on loads of things. But yeah, the next natural step, I guess, is to optimize those.
Yeah, and I thought that you said some really interesting things as well, is that in theory, what you guys are doing is you can demonstrate that business value, because it might be that like we've got a data set, we actually don't know if it's got useful information in there or not, and then you guys can train that out, and if there is something, you know, like you say, longer term, then it might become like a fully fledged data science model. So you can, in some ways, you can be like prototyping and POC type work, can't you, before it becomes production?
Because it's quite a big business decision to build a strategy around an automated model. So I think a lot of the benefit of Insight is kind of taking customers on that journey of like getting them to understand their own data and trying to get them to trust the insights that you found, for them to then be able to make these big, sometimes quite probably scary to them, business like changes.
Yeah, definitely. And if they can demonstrate, as you say, like that your project has delivered that value, they've then got the, you know, go to the finance team or whoever it is that needs to go to say, look, we need to spend this on, you know, a daily model essentially. Yeah, that's brilliant. So what type of technology and tools do you typically use? And I think what I'm probably more interested, well, I'm probably interested in both sides, but like one, how you would like do the insight, and then also how you would typically then sort of present those findings to the customers or the, you know, relevant people.
So we probably use SQL for most data transformation, and then we do all of our analysis and modeling in R. So those are the kind of the tools and technologies that we use. We do that all on the Peak platform, which is built on AWS. So those are the kind of tools we use. Like R is obviously very good for all this like statistical side of data. So that's kind of why it was the chosen one. So our team, the wider data science team, kind of use a lot of Python, but the Insight team rely a lot on R, just because it's really good at what it does. And we've also got a like Peak theme, which is a peak colored themed version of ggplot. So all of our visualizations that we produce in R are consistent. So that's made it super easy to like for everyone to kind of have the same output. So that's the tools that we kind of use, and then we typically present our findings back in presentations. So we'll often go to the customers site and then present that back. So a lot of like how to get the insights across is telling a story with the data. We have a couple of blogs on it of people telling it probably better than I will now, but essentially
I've read a couple of those. They're great. They're really good.
It's like essentially what I was saying about like taking the customer on the journey. Like you have to say like, understand your data, this is what it's telling us, these are the recommendations, kind of like taking them on that story with you. So it's a real big part of the job and a skill that like everyone's had to develop, which is telling this story with data and getting them to trust the findings that you've presented. But it's typically in a presentation, but some customers don't want a presentation. Some customers want slightly different things. Some customers are way more output driven. It really depends on the stakeholder on the other side. So if the stakeholder on the customer side is C-suite, they probably more likely want a presentation. If they are a data stakeholder, they might be more output driven. They might want a different format. So it really depends, but that kind of all comes out in the scoping part of the project. So
Makes sense. Yeah, I think that's really key, isn't it? I think from what you're saying in this particular role, telling the story, because
Yeah.
you can't just present. Well, some people you might be able to, but you can't really just present a dashboard without saying, "Look,"
Yeah.
or a
No.
line graph or something, without saying, "This is what this is telling you," because
Mhm.
otherwise, anyone can build a graph essentially. But yeah, having that story related to it,
Yeah. And I think that's
is
where all that
almost
business context comes into it as well. Like we spend
yes,
so much time with our customers scoping out the problem, understanding their business context, why they even want this insight in the first place. And I think what a dashboard wouldn't be able to tell you is all of that business context.
context.
So
Yeah, so
it
true.
might show you something has gone up, something has gone down, but you don't have the context as to why. So I think that's another key part.
Yeah, and I think you pretty much read my mind, because the next question I was going to ask is that I imagine that you need to spend within this particular role and with your customers, you spend a lot of time thinking about the context within the data. And one sort of example that is a really straightforward example, I'm sure you've got better examples, is that let's say you're working with a retail customer, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
and within that data set of sales, you've got like a spike in sales. And let's just pretend you don't know what Black Friday is, for instance. How would you typically handle something like that? Because let's just say, for instance, that you've just got a sales data set and a customer data set. You don't actually have anything around like the promotions and things like that. Is that
Yeah.
because you won't always have data for things like this, will you? For the context. How
Yeah.
would you typically handle something like this? Would it just be a lot of discussing these things with the customers to say, like, did anything happen on this day, for instance, to cause that?
Yeah, definitely. I think like Black Friday is a really good example, but some of our customers sell cement. So
Yeah, of course, it doesn't matter for them, really. Yeah.
yeah, so then they have different business context that we need to understand.
Mm,
So I think that's one of the things that makes the job really, really interesting, because you get to work with this like really varied like customer base. And yeah, some of their business context might be something that we found a few weeks ago was like pack size is a problem. So we'd seen that sales
yeah.
were really low for a particular product, but really high for this pack. And it like the product was in the pack, that kind of thing. But that all kind of, you just wouldn't know unless you were having
Yeah.
these conversations with the customer. So yeah, the first part of the project process for us is always sitting down with the customer to fully try and embed ourselves into their world. And yeah, then we have to validate all of their data. We'll then have a bunch of questions, because that will,
Yeah.
like often, obviously, data is just all over the place.
Yep.
So we'll have a bunch of questions. We'll then go back to them to say, either if we've made some assumptions, we'll get them to validate our assumptions, or if we just don't know why something is the way it is, they can shed some light on it, because a lot of the time they will know everything in their head, but they
Yeah.
won't think to say, oh, by
Yeah.
the way, on the 15th of July, we had a massive promotion, because they just
Yes.
won't think to say it. So
Yeah.
it's definitely like a conversation the whole time, which I think is what helps us build trust with them as well. Like we're not claiming to be able to look at your data and just
Mm.
know everything. Like you are the experts in your own company. We're just trying to do the part of like finding all of these opportunities in your data, but it's definitely a two-way conversation. So like that context that we keep talking about,
Mm.
that is essential to the recommendations we will make. There's no point in us saying, oh, you don't need to mark down on the last weekend of
Yeah.
November because sales are really high every year. Well, yeah, it's Black Friday. You're already marking down. That's why they're high.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's for our outputs and for our recommendations to be actionable for the customer. It takes a lot of business context.
And this might be quite a simple answer, but how would you typically keep track of like the context in the data? Like, do you find for it, like, I'll use Black Friday as an example, but I'm sure there's more complicated examples, so it might not be this easy, but would you find that you almost need to create a new data set for the business context that you can overlay with like the sales to sort of say like, well, this day this happened, this day this happened, and things like, is that how you would track it, or do you have to like keep it, is it not quite that, it's probably not quite that simple, is it?
It depends really, because if we're looking at a particular problem and say refunds need to be taken out of the data set, we'll make a new data set and we'll exclude refunds if it's not relevant to the insight and if that's the part of the like context that needs taking out. But if it's something like Black Friday as an example that everyone can kind of like relate to, if we're looking at sales over time, for example, and obviously we can see a massive spike on Black Friday, often we can just call it out and just say, like, as a reminder to everyone in the room, because also you don't kind of know how far this insight is going. So often we'll just call it out and say, by the way, this is Black Friday 2022. And there's a consistency throughout the whole presentation then. Acknowledging the context that we have, and so that every time we go onto a new slide and say there's a massive spike, everyone's not like, what's that big spike? We've called it out, and it's that like continuity throughout the presentation of that context. Like one of our customers, for example, changed their pricing at a particular point in time. So we'd have a call out on every slide to say this was the point of time of price changing, for example. So we can like clearly draw attention to like the comparison of like before and after. Sometimes it is really simple. It's literally just
you know, like this happened then, but
but it's not obvious all the time, and it's also quite hard, I think, for customers to digest a lot of information at once. So just making it as easily digestible as possible is also a huge part of the job. So yeah, just calling it out really.
That storytelling, and again it goes back to the storytelling element, doesn't it? Like that's the important bit, isn't it? That you've got these findings, but it has to form a story, and like you say, you might need to keep calling certain things out, I say, just to remind you that this changed at this point. And with that pricing example, I'm interested to know whether was that something that you were aware of in the data, or did that come out from discussions with the customers? That like, did you suddenly go, what, did something happen here because of this, or did they preempt that and call it out originally?
So that was essentially the big business decision. So they had changed their pricing. They didn't know if it was the right decision. So that's that reactive.
So they were actually asking,
so they previously were reactive in the decision, and then wanted to now be proactive to say, did we actually make the right decision? So that was kind of the story of that project anyway. But pointing out when the impact of that change happened, I think, was the main thing.
Makes sense. That was great. It's really interesting around the context of data. I don't think it's something that people pay enough attention to a lot of the time. And the storytelling as well. It's something that I think we all need to get better at. What are the main challenges that you come up against within the area of insight? I imagine it's quite quite challenging in the area sometimes.
I think besides bad data, which everyone has, the main challenge, and I actually don't think this is just for insight, I just think for all kind of data roles, is getting people to trust what you're showing them. A lot of our stakeholders are C-suite, and they are making some quite big decisions, but sometimes what we find isn't what they thought, and so it completely contradicts something they used to think. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is like getting them to like believe the insights that you've drawn from their own data, which it can be quite hard sometimes. And obviously on their side, they have a lot of context, and they might have been there for years, believing something that the data is now saying isn't necessarily true. So it is hard from both sides to then trust the data. But I'd say that's the big challenge.
I can imagine, because everyone's kind of got these deep-seated beliefs, haven't they? And like, oh, we know this type of customer is really profitable, but then like when you actually look at the data, like, actually it's not. And like you say, if they've had that narrative in their head for a long time, I imagine that's quite. I suppose that comes back to, like, again, the storytelling side of things, is that you need to, have it in such a way that it's more easily digestible by the people.
I think it's that, and then mixed with like the building relationships, which is why it's just such a big part of the role. We want them to trust you, your opinion. That's why we need to embed ourselves like so deeply into their business and understand so much that we can, on a personal level, build that trust.
Yeah.
When we take them on this story with their data, they trust that we've taken into account everything we've spoken about, all the business context. And that's when it comes back to those questions that we have around their data and getting it checked and making sure our assumptions are correct. It's all part of this this relationship building with the customer, so that when we eventually present these insights, if it is either something that contradicts what they thought, or it might be something that contradicts what the decision maker thinks, which is even harder because they have to also they have to take your insight to the decision maker and kind of fight on behalf of you without you in the room. So it has to be strong enough that it can do that, which obviously is a challenge.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. And as you were saying that, then I was thinking that with the insight data science role, I imagine I think sometimes you might think with data scientists and insight data scientists, all you're doing is sitting there working with data. But from what you're saying, I think a lot of it is like that. A lot of hands-off work in a lot of ways, in terms of, like you say, the relationship building, talking to the customers, making sure you're getting all that context out, rather than just, because I think it's quite easy to sometimes just be in the data and just right, what can I find in here? But you probably find much more by actually having those conversations. So
yeah, definitely. And I think the more time we can spend with the customer, things naturally fall out in conversation that they might not have, like I was saying before, they might not even think to mention.
Yeah.
But the more kind of probing questions that we can ask, they might just say something and we go, that's actually quite interesting and that's quite relevant to what we're looking at. But yeah, a lot of it, like I was saying before about working in-house, there isn't really as much of that building relationships. It's very much just people coming to the team and asking for something quite specific, and you kind of providing what you've found. But this is, I think, as well, because they're trusting us with their data. We don't work in their business, so we don't have years of experience with their business and how they operate. So I think there's an added layer of having to build that trust, which is you've gone from knowing nothing about us to then recommending quite big
to becoming experts essentially in their data in a short space of time.
So that's probably the biggest challenge, but it's fun as well, because when they do action the recommendations, it's incredibly rewarding. So
I was going to say, I can imagine it can be quite rewarding, because you've got that quick, in a lot of ways, you've got quite a quick feedback loop as well, haven't you? It's you're working on a short space of time, and then I'm sure you can follow up in a couple of months to see how things have gone, and I'm sure you find out anyway how things have gone. But it's quite interesting, because I think it's quite, as you say, in-house, sometimes you don't necessarily get that same sort of feedback loop, and you can sometimes just be producing things but not necessarily seeing the output.
Definitely. That's been my favorite thing about working in this kind of more varied role, is that the customers that are coming to us, they're coming to us with a specific question, whereas previously, like I said, it was reactive. It wasn't, and if you did get the chance to kind of work on a bigger strategic question, they probably didn't ask for it. They probably won't action it, in my experience anyway. It's a lot harder to get people to action things when they didn't come to you with this problem.
It's a really good point. I hadn't really thought of it that way. Because by the time they've come to you guys, they've genuinely got we're going to spend some money here, we've got a problem, and we want an output from it. So really good point. I think this is probably a question that you might have been asked before, and I think a lot of people are bored of it, but I feel like I have to ask it. Do you see large language models like ChatGPT and things like that being able to help kind of in the insight area? And do you see it playing a role at some point?
No, it's a good question. I've been to a few conferences recently, and this is the topic.
It's all people talk about at the moment, isn't it? So I feel like not asking it, but at the same time, you can't not ask it.
No, it's fine. There's definitely, I think the main thing can be used for is just like efficiency gains. Like
100%.
it's good at taking tasks that you either don't want to do or that just take too much time for what they need to take. It can be really good for that. So say we have some commentary about some insight we found and it's too long, it can make it more succinct, for example. Like it's good at things like that. It's good at making your life more efficient, and it frees you up to then do like more of the stuff that it can't do. It's good, and it's good for like creating questions. So one of the things that we need to do like in the project process is come up with a proposed approach to how we're going to answer this question, and that can take a while, coming up with ideas and also coming up with new ideas sometimes. Like it can be quite an like intense job with data. Like you're in data a lot, you've got like you have to think a lot essentially. What it can be good for is just like doing a little bit of the thinking for you and say like, have you thought about these questions? And then you can then go away, and it's kind of like just having a conversation with someone. Like they say, oh, have you thought about looking at price elasticities? And you go, oh yeah, I'll do. And then you can build an approach around that. So there's things it can be used for, and you obviously can feed it in context.
Yes.
But you can't feed it in every conversation you've been in with that customer, like I've been talking about. So yeah, I think it's, yeah, everyone's using it. There's definitely ways to use it. I think the main thing for me is just efficiency rather than anything else.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great answer. And I think I heard it on a podcast recently. I think someone basically was saying that in theory, ChatGPT or these LLMs are essentially like a personal assistant that you've got.
Yeah.
That you can just use like an extension, exactly as you say, helping you with some of them tasks that just take a bit of time, but it just makes things more efficient. Like, yeah, I completely agree. I think people think it's going to replace certain things that it just wouldn't replace, particularly as you say, like those conversations, because you also need to know what questions to ask it. It's not just going to be creative without any sort of those conversations. And as you say as well, it's not even the questions sometimes. It's like you might even be, having lunch with one of your clients and they just casually say something and you're like, oh, you didn't tell me that. Like, that's actually important.
Definitely. I think I've spoken to a few people and they are making some like quite cool versions of it, which essentially are like Chat GPT, but specific, just taking learnings from like scientific papers, for example. So in theory, hallucination should be much less because it's just learning off a specific use case. So I think things like that, it is cool. It's a really cool space.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are scared of it. But I don't think they should be. I think people are probably scared of Google when Google came out, and they're not now. And I don't think that's.
I think computers in general, people
So
it's I agree. It's the same with any new technology that's so different to what you've had before, because we've not seen anything that advanced. And
so I think that's why it scares people. It is incredibly clever. And some people can't really wrap their head around how something can even get like to be that smart. So I think that's what's scary. But if you go back to any of the things that we thought, oh my God, this is incredible, we now just completely take for granted. So I think as long as people see it as a tool, it's something that they can use to help them.
Use it in the right way for the right things.
In the right way, exactly. Because it can do a lot of good as well. So yeah.
Brilliant. So other than ChatGPT, are there any other kind of upcoming trends or technologies that excite you? Doesn't have to be in the kind of insight area, but if it is, that's be nice to tie it back to that.
Yeah, well, I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago that was talking about AI for good, and someone else was talking about essentially like AI in the healthcare industry, and I think that's like, in terms of people being scared of it, the opposite is like, what is the best thing it can do? And that's going to have to be something to like healthcare. So like one of the examples I was saying before about the large language model learning from a specific use case, I was talking to someone and they would doing like more of a proof of concept about like mental health. So it was like trying to take something that is potentially scary, but just using it specifically for something good. And I think, yeah, it's not particularly insight driven, but I think like in terms of data in the AI world, like I think we should be talking more about all the good things it's doing rather than like it's going to take over the world and it's really scary and it's going to take people's jobs. What if actually it's just going to save lives, or it's going to be able to like predict like natural disasters and how to help with that. So there's loads of cool stuff it's doing. I think people just like, well, I think the media just likes to obviously scare people.
Oh yeah, they like anything that's anything that's got hype behind it, don't they? They like to scare,
exactly.
like you say, yeah.
But there is a lot of hype behind large language models, but like there could be 100%. Hype like for the good stuff as well. So I think, yeah, that's probably the most exciting thing for me.
Yeah, it's a great answer because, like you say, based on what they currently do, like say, imagine if you can use them in healthcare.
Yeah.
And natural disasters is a great one, yeah, because things like earthquakes and stuff like that, it's quite often it's too late when they're actually the warnings come out. But if these are able, you can use them to predict them sooner. Yeah.
Yeah, so they can predict them sooner, and they can also then allocate like disaster relief more efficiently. So that's a huge gain that we've had because of them, not something to be scared of necessarily. So
totally agree. Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks, Holly. I want to be conscious of your time. I've taken up quite a lot of it, but that was really interesting. Like, there's a lot of stuff I've learned from it. Like I said at the start, it's definitely not my area of expertise, and I think it is often quite an overlooked area sometimes. So it was brilliant. So thank you so much for doing that. Have you got no problem? And have you got anything else you'd like to add before we get off?
No, I guess I was just going to ask you, like, I guess the same question. Like, you obviously interview a lot of different people in different roles. So I guess like, what's one of the most interesting things you've kind of either learned or that you're excited about, like off the back of those conversations?
Yeah, great question. I think for me personally, and I think because of the type of role that I'm in, like the architecture role where you kind of overseeing a lot. I think what I find really interesting is the data mesh conversations. And so I come from my background in business intelligence, so I spent a lot of time like building data warehouses and things like that. And the whole idea of building a data warehouse was you have all these disparate data sources, you bring them all into a single repository for people to report on, which is still largely what happens now. Whereas now something like data mesh completely turns that on its head in a lot of ways. And when I first heard about it, I'm going to say when I first heard about it, probably for the first 12 months, I was like, no, no, just I can't get my head around it. It seems to be the complete opposite of what I've been used to, what I believe in, and things like that. Whereas when you actually, because one of the things is with like the data warehouses, that was like a technology, whereas data mesh is actually very theoretical as well in terms of how you split things in domains and things like that. You've got your federated data governance and all those types of things, your data as a product. So that, for me, is a super interesting area. And I'm really interested to see what happens over the next 5 years, because I feel like a lot of organizations still have that kind of traditional, I won't even say traditional because they've obviously moved with the times, it's a lot of it's cloud data warehouses and things now and lake houses. But a lot of companies now, I think, have got that centralized lake house or warehouse, but then they've got elements of data mesh sprinkled in because they've got because data is so big now. You've got like within your say sales teams, for instance, they may have data engineers, data analysts, data scientists. So they're kind of, in some ways, I think in the past we definitely saw that as a negative, which I understand why, because you've got people doing things in silos. But I think if you implement something like data mesh and you do it properly and you take everything into consideration, which, don't get me wrong, is really difficult to do, particularly at the moment, that it really could take us forward.
Yeah.
I think it's just a really interesting area. I think it's so new at the moment. There's some organizations that I think are doing it. Like, I think Spotify is like one of the examples, but I think it's a lot easier to do it somewhere like Spotify when it's it's a tech first company. It's not been around that long. It's harder if a company's been around since 1950 to be able to get into something like that. But I'm really interested in that area. It's hard to say which way it will go at the moment. It might even go in a cycle, because these things often go in a cycle, is that everyone goes data mesh and then everyone goes back to data lakehouse, data warehouse in 20 years. But that's a very interesting area for me. And obviously ChatGPT, can't not have that in there, because that's excited to see where that one goes.
No, cool, thanks.
Brilliant. Right, well, take care. I'm sure we'll hopefully we can do this again at some point, because that was really interesting. I really enjoyed that.
Sounds good. Cool.
Great.
Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, Holiday.
Bye.